Today, Riot shifted gears when it comes to reveal season. Yesterday, we got Kennen. Today, we get a brand new keyword along with some cards revealed from a different region. Very Targon heavy today. I'm excited to talk about the reveals. You might be wondering, hey, Charmer, where's your face? To which I would reply, why do you care? It's just my face. But also, I would answer that I got my booster for the COVID vaccine yesterday, and I've actually got a fever right now, so I'm filming this with the lights off, and we are going to push through kind of briefly. I probably won't be as long-winded as usual, so maybe you'll celebrate that. I don't know. But I do want to still cover the cards that were revealed today. So we're going to start by talking about the new keyword. The new keyword is FATED, and it says the first time each round an ally card targets me, grant me +1/+1. So some key takeaways here is it has to be a target, so it cannot be a board-wide effect. It has to be an ally card, so this means spells or potential player summon effects that are coming from units when they come into play, for example. And then also this is grant, which means this is a permanent +1/+1. Now, there is a card that they have here on the screen to kind of showcase that FATED keyword, but it's also on the next graphic. So we're just going to go ahead and move on so that we can talk about all of the reveals, starting with Saga Seeker, that card from the previous screen. This is a 1-cost 1/2 follower from Targon, and it just has the FATED keyword. So pretty straightforward, kind of generic. I like that it is the sort of thing that you can build on in certain decks. So for example, if you are playing some sort of buff heavy deck and you still want an early presence, I like that this has the FATED keyword because it scales. It means that over time, if you are playing effects and you're targeting this is a 1-drop that could very easily get to 4 power and then give you some very relevant trades later on. And there is an interesting interaction with FATED as well, where it kind of innately buffs card buffs when you play them, because you're going to get the +1/+1 from FATED on top of whatever effect it is that you are playing as well. And that's very relevant. So overall, I think this card is fine. I don't know if it's going to be good enough to make it into an existing archetype at the moment. We'll have to wait and see if FATED becomes a thing. I could see a number of FATED cards making it into certain archetypes. For example, I think about Tarek, because anytime you are playing a spell on Tarek and then it's copying onto whichever card he is supporting, that will also be triggering FATED as well, and you're going to get some additional value from Tarek and so on and so forth. So I think that FATED has some existing potential archetypes, but I also feel like we're not getting the full picture quite yet. But there are some neat, even just kind of individual cards here, so we're going to keep it moving. Next up, this is IULA. I do not know how to pronounce this. I'm not going to pretend to know how to pronounce this. I think it's probably IULA. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to attempt. But this is a 3-cost 3/3 follower in Targon, and on play, you give an ally Spell Shield and Overwhelm this round. So a couple of takeaways. First, it is only for this round. It is give, not grant. It is 2 keywords though, and Spell Shield is potentially the most relevant. A use that I could see here is if you really wanted to give a big hitter Overwhelm, traditionally you would have to have some sort of like burst spell if you were trying to set up an open attack. So if you've got a, very high attack power unit and you also were playing Targon, you might have to play something like Zenith, for example, to give it Overwhelm, and then that's opening up your opponent having the ability to respond, right? Because you've played that slow spell, so you've passed priority. So with this follower, you are still passing priority, but because you've played this, you're granting that Overwhelm and Spell Shield, and the Spell Shield might end up being just enough to offset that passing of priority. A 3/3 for 3 isn't terrible. And again, Spell Shield and Overwhelm are very relevant keywords. If you are playing a deck that is heavy with FATED, this is a targeted effect. So again, if you were to play this on, say, Saga Seeker, for example, then it would get that +1/+1 as well. So it's okay. I think this is the kind of card that ends up being really good in expeditions, but probably not good enough to make the cut in constructed decks. And if it does, it's more likely going to be a utility inclusion. I don't think you jam 3 of these, for example, but maybe as a 1-of for tech, you could potentially make an argument So I like it. I like what it's trying to do for the archetype. I think this is the kind of card that is very good for teaching new players how to play with Fated, for example, if you're trying to build that as an archetype. So from a design standpoint, I get it and I understand it. Next up, we have Blinded Mystic. This might be my favorite of the reveals today. This is a 4-cost 3/2 follower from Targon. On play, grant an ally +1/+1 and silence an enemy follower. If you're coming from the Elder Scrolls Legends, this is going to look really familiar because it reminds me a lot of Earthbone Spinner. And it's not quite the same. Earthbone Spinner silenced a unit but also did 1 damage to it, and a lot of times that removed the buffs and then the damage would kill anything that just natively had 1 health. This not going to do the same thing. However, the silence is still really strong. It is only followers. That's another thing to consider. So this is probably not quite as strong as Earthbone Spinner was, but the silence is relevant. You still get a body out of it, but also the grant an ally +1/+1 is a nice stat boost. And if you are targeting a Fated unit, well, it's going to get essentially +2/+2 because Fated will trigger when you target it. And then obviously the Mystic is granting its own +1/+1. So being able to play this and again get a key silence while generating some additional value on a more key unit is a pretty big deal. So as we're talking about, you know, Fated units and potential targets, we're going to move on and talk about Wounded White Flame. This is a 3-cost 2/4 follower. It has the dragon tag. It's in Targon, and it has the Fury and the Fated keywords. So a couple of things to note here. One, this being a 3-cost and Blinded Mystic being a 4-cost means if you play this on 3 and you play that Mystic on 4, you're going to silence a follower, you're going to get your 3/2, and then this 2/4 that you spent 3 mana on is going to jump all the way up to a 4/6 at that point, as well as still having that Fury keyword. I love that we have a dragon with Fury and Fated, because one of the things that is interesting about Fury is it makes your dragons get bigger, but a lot of times you're not getting into combat with 1/1s. It happens sometimes, like in the peak days of Azir and Aurelia, you could block endlessly with dragons, but for the most part, you traditionally don't have a way to recoup the health. You might have a couple of healing cards in Targon, but it's not like an emphasis. So if you enter Fated into the equation, and now you are even doing things like single combat, for example, single combat is going to be targeting your Wounded White Flame, which means it's going to get that buff from Fated, and then if it kills a unit, it will get that buff from Fury. So this is a way that you can potentially use both of these keywords to really get some mileage out of a simple 3-drop. Really enjoy it. Another thing worth pointing out is this is the first dragon that we have seen that does not automatically kill Dragon Chow. So Dragon Chow being that 1-cost 0/3, and when you play a dragon, it strikes the Dragon Chow and then you draw a card. So the interesting thing with Wounded White Flame is if you play the Chow on 1, you play your Wounded White Flame on 3, you're going to get to draw a card. The Dragon Chow will take the 2 damage, go down to a 0/1, but you do get to draw the card. You will not get the Fury trigger because White Flame isn't killing the Dragon Chow, but you do still generate your 2/4 with the 2 keywords and you draw a card. And then because Dragon Chow is still on the board, the following round, on round 4, if you're playing Shyvana, for example, you could play Shyvana, you'll draw another card from the Chow. Shyvana will still also get that Fury trigger from killing the Dragon Chow, and also at that point we've done, you know, some additional damage with dragons. We've got another dragon on the board so that you can then, if you've got the attack token on round 4, you can swing with 2 and really start getting Shyvana close to leveling at that point. So a lot to like, I think, about Wounded White Flame. You look at this and it could be very easy to be dismissive. It is, after all, just a 2/4 for 3 mana with no immediate payoffs, no comes into play effects, etc., etc. But I think the 2 keywords mesh really well together. I think the 2 keywords mesh really well with what dragons want to do and with what Targon wants to do. So overall, I think Wounded White Flame might be a bit of a sleeper. I don't think it's as good as Blinded Mystic. I think Blinded Mystic is absolutely going to be a bit of a sleeper inclusion because it just does a lot. Even if it's only targeting followers and you can't hit champions, it's still a really powerful effect on a body. And if you're coming from the Elder Scrolls Legends, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the last card revealed was We Stand Together. This is a 3-cost burst spell in Targon. and it very simply says give 2 allies +1/+2 this round. Now I say very simply because it's obviously a bit more complex than it looks on the surface. Yes, this is just a nice simple combat trick. You get overall 2/4 in stats spread across 2 units for the low price of 3 mana at burst speed. So it's a useful combat trick. It'd be really good in something like Expeditions. In existing decks in the current meta, it's a bit weird to fit in because you don't run a ton of units in something like Lee Sin, for example, so I don't think you really want to run this in that deck. This actually, I think, works really well in some sort of like Targon aggressive deck. If we ever had a meta again where Freljord control is very relevant and go wide elusive decks are more relevant, specifically ones that are trying to include Zoe. For example, you know, I've done Zoe, Targon, and Ionia. I call it Lulusives, right? Where it's Lulu and Zoe a number of times. If that's ever a deck that becomes somewhat relevant and then you're crashing into a bunch of Freljord control, the we stand together portion, in my opinion, that is the most relevant is that 2 health, right? So this combats those 2 damage board wide effects very well in response. Now you can't answer Ravine very well because it's going to fire off and you won't have the opportunity to respond, but great against Avalanche. Also could still protect key units against something like Withering Whale. Yes, you could use it to push 2 extra damage through, but this is, after all, a day where we are showcasing the Fated keyword. It is worth noting that in a Fated deck, so again, if we get many more Fated reveals and we get more support for that keyword and it becomes its own archetype, this is a bit more relevant because this is a targeting card and it targets 2 allies and it does so at a relatively cheap cost. So you would be giving 2 units essentially +2/+3, and they get to keep +1/+1 of it permanently because they're going to get that Fated trigger while also getting the round buff from We Stand Together. So in my opinion, these are foundational. I think this is a great way to kind of set up, okay, here's Fated as a keyword. Here are some really basic tools for how you could see an archetype playing out where you want to play units and then also buff them. As I said before, yes, there are some champions and some cards that I think go naturally pretty well into this archetype. I'm thinking about champions like Fizz, where you want to play him and then you kind of play this tempo game where you play spells to keep Fizz alive. And then if you maybe sprinkle in some Targon elusives with your Fizz and maybe some Fated cards, then you can really ramp up your value. As I said before, you could also consider Taric, because Taric allows you to get some extra mileage from your spells in that regard as well. There are some foundational pieces. I think Fated works really well with Demacia because, again, if you're using single combat, if you're using concerted strike, that should be triggering Fated here as well. So overall, I think these are great foundational pieces, but it's obviously not like enough to just say, okay, well, I'm going to play the Fated deck. We're very clearly waiting for the rest of the puzzle, and we're also waiting for, let's be honest, whatever champion this goes with. If I was a betting man or a guessing man, because this is in Targon and because of, you know, some of the artwork we see here, it wouldn't shock me if this means we're going to get like Pantheon at some point soon. I think that Pantheon being this one-stop shop, you know, going from Pantheon straight to Mantheon, where you just make him the man of your team and you continue to buff him every round, and Fated goes off a ton of times and you give him a bunch of keywords and he just ascends ascends to his greatness, ascends to the top of whatever it is that you want him to ascend the top to, the mountain, the Pantheon. I wanted to say ascend to the Pantheon, but then I realized his name is Pantheon, and so my Greek myth and my League of Legends names were crisscrossing and my brain fried. So we're gonna pretend like that didn't happen and we're gonna keep rolling. My point here is, I think right now this points toward potentially it being a Pantheon. Now I don't know if Pantheon's coming in this set. It's entirely possible that this is laying the foundation, and then maybe in a future add-on set that we get Pantheon. Pantheon was very clearly not shown in the original reveal trailer. We only saw Kennen and Ari. I don't know. Traditionally, these expansions give us 3 champions, so maybe Pantheon is the 3rd. I'm thinking about, for example, when we had Rek'Sai and we had Pyke revealed, we also had that third champion, right? So even though Lurk was like the archetype of that expansion, that mini expansion, if you will, there was very clearly still extra stuff that made it in. And given that Targon already has some existing support tools for Fated, I don't think that you have to go overboard with a ton of Fated stuff to make it work, at least out of the gate. So it's possible that we get something like this, we get another round of support tools, and then we get like Pantheon, and that might be enough to at least introduce him to Legends of Runeterra. And that's what I'm hoping for. So anyway, as I said before, I kind of want to keep this a bit shorter. I know that I'm actually already at like 15 minutes or something, so short isn't really short with me. I can't help but be long-winded, but if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for hanging out with me. I want to hear about your thoughts. I want to hear, are you excited for Fated and what this archetype could become? If it is Pantheon, are you excited for that as a potential option? If you think it's not Pantheon, then tell me what champion you think it could be as well. I just, you know, I love reading the comments, and I definitely check them all out. So let me know what you think. As always, until next time, may you walk on warm sands.